Hi Year 7. This is the first in a series of 5 lessons that I'm going to give on area. And in this first video, we're going to look at units of area. But let's begin by defining area. It's the total surface that's occupied by a closed shape. And you can see this in the diagram. So in each case, for each of these shapes, the coloured part is the area of those shapes. Now, since area is a two-dimensional measurement, so it's got length and breadth, units are almost always squared. So for example, we talk about millimeters squared, centimeters squared, meters squared, and even kilometers squared. Now, the exception to this rule is the hectare. 1 hectare is equal to 10,000 square meters, and it has the abbreviation HA. Now, you're probably thinking, is that like acres? It is similar to acres, and acres are still used by many people, but an acre is not a metric measurement. It's actually called an imperial measurement, like feet and inches and stones. So we still use acre, but the metric equivalent is hectare. And of course, one of the most common places that we use hectares is to measure the land on a farm. And this is a picture of my farm in northern New South Wales, and it has 20 hectares, or around about 50 acres. So which unit would you use to measure the amount of land on a farm? We just talked about that, didn't we? We'd use hectares. But the area of a country, we'd probably use kilometres squared. What about the area of a tabletop? So we could use metres squared if it's a large table, or probably centimetres squared. The area of a playground, so we could use metres squared, be unlikely to be hectares. What about the area of your fingernail? That one's probably millimetres squared, or maybe centimetres squared. Let's look at how we convert between units of area. And the key is to remember that it's a two-dimensional unit. So here I've got a diagram that represents 1 centimetre squared, and I've broken it up into millimetres. Remember, there are 10 millimetres in a centimetre. Now we can easily see that there aren't 10 millimetres squared in a centimetre squared. Can you see that? There's actually 100. So area conversions need to be done twice. We need to do it once for length and then once for breadth. So 1 centimetre squared, we could write that as 1 centimetre times 1 centimetre. Let's convert this one into millimetres and this one into millimetres. 10 times 10 is 100. So there are 100 millimetres squared in a centimetre squared. Now, before we move on to some examples, we need to remember our length conversions. So kilometres to metres is multiplying by 1,000, and then metres to millimetres is also multiplying by 1,000. Putting centimetres in the middle here really mucks it up. So one of the basic rules that I teach students is that in measurement, everything is 1,000 unless it's got centimetres involved. If we go the other way, then millimetres to metres, we divide by 1,000, and then metres to kilometres, we divide by 1,000. And again, you can see centimetres in there, mucking everything up. Here's our first example. Convert 3 kilometres squared to metres squared. So our first step is to work out the conversion factor. How many metres are there in a kilometre? Well, there's 1,000. Our second step is to work out whether we're going to multiply or divide. So we want to go from kilometres squared, which are really big things, into metres squared, which are smaller things. So I'm going to get more of them. The way to get more is to multiply. So I'm going to multiply by 1,000, but I'm going to do it twice, once for each dimension. Because remember, we're going from kilometres squared to metres squared. They're squared units. So times 1,000 times 1,000. So 3 kilometres squared is equivalent to 3 million metres squared. Here's our second example. Convert 2,000 millimetres squared to centimetres squared. What's the conversion factor? It's 10. There are 10 millimetres in a centimetre. Do I want to divide or multiply? I'm going from little tiny things into bigger things. So I want less of them. That's divide. So I'm going to do 2,000 divide 10 divide 10. I'm doing the conversion twice because we've got squared units. And our answer is 20 centimetres squared. Now you might be really confused by all of that, so let's look at a practical example. Consider the rectangle below. It has dimensions 8 centimetres by 4 centimeters. And if we want to work out the area of that rectangle, we're just going to do length times breadth, which is 8 times 4, and that's 32 centimeters squared. Now what happens if we convert the measurements to millimeters first? How many millimeters are there in 8 centimeters? There's 80, isn't there? Because there's 10 millimeters in a centimeter. And in 4 centimeters, there would be 40. So let's do the area now. Area is length times breadth, which is 80 times 40, which is 320 millimeters squared. Let's compare those two. 32 centimeters squared, 320 millimeters squared. Can you see how I had to do the conversion twice, once for each dimension? So how many millimeters squared are there in a centimeter squared? There's 100, isn't there? So in summary, when converting between squared units, we must do the conversion twice, once for each dimension. Okay, I promised that we'd look further at hectares. Converting between hectares and meters squared is different because a hectare is not a squared unit. Can you see how we don't write HA squared? We just write HA. 1 hectare is equal to 10,000 square meters. One way to remember that is it's the same as 2 football fields. A football field is 100 meters by 50 meters, and if we add 2 of them, then we've got 100 times 100, which is 10,000 square meters. So if we want to do a conversion, like convert 3 hectares to meters squared, we only have to do the conversion once. 1 hectare is 10,000 square meters, so 3 hectares must be 30,000 square meters. Okay, that's it for this lesson. You'll want to do some practice so that you are confident converting those units of measurement. In our next lesson, we're going to look at area of a rectangle.